Hello and welcome to today's webinar, AV over IP, Why You Should Consider Networked AV. My name is Mandy Joyner and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping details. First, everyone will be muted throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, please use the chat feature in the top left-hand corner of your screen and we will answer them at the end. The webinar is being recorded and we will have it available for all attendees afterwards. Also, if you need to adjust any of the settings, there's also a gear in the top left-hand corner. You can use that to adjust any of your settings as well. With that, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Mike Peterson. Mike Peterson is an expert in developing visualization, simulation, and audiovisual technology solutions while incorporating professional-grade audio, video, projection, control, and computer graphic systems. Currently serving as a solutions engineer for Mechdyne, Mike interacts extensively with clients to understand their needs and problems to develop creative and unique solutions. Mike has over 20 years of engineering experience, including 18 years in advanced visualization, and has served as an adjunct faculty with Infocom University. Mike holds both CTSD and CTSI certifications. And with that, we will get started, and thank you so much, Mike, for being our presenter today.
Thank you, Mandy. And good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you all today. So we're going to talk about AV over IP, and so let's get started. Little definitions to start with here. So what is a network? So the Oxford Dictionary says a network is a group or system of interconnected people or things. So you're going to find a couple of key terms there. The first term is system. The system kind of implies that there's a combined amount of functionality to everything that's connected together. So they're working together toward a singular end. And interconnected, ultimately everything is connected or linked together in some way. So let's talk about networked AV. So networked AV is essentially AV devices interconnected as a system, as we described in the last slide. Also known as AV over IP. So the IP, that's short for Internet Protocol, and that's one of the standard protocols that's used within the computer networking world to begin to transfer information over the computer network cables. It's basically packetized data distribution via computer networks. It's often, you might see it combined with the term Transmission Control Protocol, or TCP. So those often go together as TCP/IP as a terminology. It's audiovisual content transmission via network cables that you're very familiar with your computers that you use every day. And they can be audio, video, or control, or in many cases, all of the above. So as we talk about networks, a little definition here as well. Let's talk about LAN versus WAN. So a LAN stands for a local area network, and this is a very limited geographic extent. In most cases, we're talking about a single building that for a LAN, although it could be as small as a single room or even a part of a room, or it could be a whole campus might be considered a LAN. When you talk about WAN, however, this is a much larger geographic extent. When you start to get statewide or national or global, you're definitely into a wide area network at that point. AV over IP can be used in a WAN situation, but that's a little bit different scenario than what we're going to be talking about today. So for the purposes of our webinar today, we're going to assume AV over IP at the LAN level only, so a much smaller geographic extent. So before we can go too far into what networked AV is, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes to talk about what networked AV is not. So, and it can be very confusing if you just look at some of the connectivity that you might be involved. So while networked AV uses what's called a category cable, it's very familiar. You have seen them often. You connect them to your computer to get to the network. Different category levels. The most common category today is a category 6 cable or a Cat 6 cable. It might also be a fiber optic cable. Now, the challenge here is that there's a lot of AV tech that also uses the same type of cable structure, So it might use a Cat5 or a Cat6 cable or fiber optics, but it's not necessarily networked AV. So, and this is because the network cable is very cost effective and easy to use, and there are very familiar to people, and it's easy to terminate. So that's why it's often used as a medium to connect devices, but not necessarily in a networked way, just more as a cable connection between two devices with some other proprietary method of transferring data across that cable. So there are dozens of manufacturers that offer twisted pair-based distribution that is not necessarily IP network-based. So here's one example of technology that uses a category cable or a network type cable to transfer audiovisual information, but is not necessarily an IP network. So HD-based-T, it's a very familiar technology. Basically, it has a lot of the similar look and feel of AV over IP, but if you would try and connect an HD-based-T device to your network switch, A, it's not going to work, and B, you're likely to damage either the device or the network switch, so not advisable. Now, what's very curious and can also get confusing is that HD-based-T as a system can carry Internet Protocol inside the protocol that HD-based-T uses. Now, it's not an IP on the outside wrapper, but there is IP embedded within the HD-based-T signal. So again, just want to make sure that you're clear as you're thinking through these, what is or is not networked AV. Some very common brands of HD-based-T type systems would be XTP systems from Extron, or the DM, digital media system from Crestron, or PJ-Link, which is often used on projectors as a HD-based-T connection type. So then to confuse things even further, HD-based-T is not AV over IP unless, of course, it's the newly announced HD-based-T over IP. So what's interesting to me there is that the HD-based-T organization, I think they also began to see the advantages of an IP-based solution, and so they were very proactive, and they came up with their own move toward IP solutions. So they've called their solution now an HD-based-T over IP, and that would actually be an AV over IP solution. So let's spend a few minutes and talk about what makes networked AV very appealing. And so what is so great about networked AV or AV over IP? Well, one of the things that we really like about networked AV is it's very, very flexible. It can be any size system where you can have two devices that are directly connected with a network cable, and it can be just as small as two devices. Or it can be thousands of devices all over on a campus, all connected by one continuous network. So it's very, very flexible that way. It's very expandable. It's very easy to expand. If you have a network switch, has a few extra network ports on it, and you have a few AV over IP connected devices, and you need to add another device, it's very easy just to add the extra device and connect that to the network switch, and now it's been added. So it's very easy to expand. It's very easy to reconfigure. If you need to change out the functionality of the devices, you can change out the endpoint devices as needed to reconfigure the system. And it's very easy to upgrade because you have the network infrastructure as a base, and it's a very standardized infrastructure. And so if you need to upgrade your functionality of your system, you can, again, just replace the existing AV over IP devices with new updated devices. One of the things that we like about networked AV is it's very easy to install. And I've kind of implied this already. It uses a very common category type cable that's very easy to terminate, very widely available. A lot of installers are very familiar and comfortable terminating it. The other thing we like is that it uses standard network switches. Again, these are very commonly available network switches and are available and easy to use. Some other things we like about networked AV. We like the fact that it can utilize existing infrastructure. So in many cases, there's already an entire network infrastructure already installed and in place within a building or within a room. And if you're very careful in how you design the system, you might be able to take advantage of this already pre-existing infrastructure. Because networks are very common. It's a very common thing to already be pre-installed in a building. So we like to be able to use the existing infrastructure where possible, including the network switches, theoretically, can also be used that's already been in place and installed. Networked AV is very easy to control. A lot of AV control is done over IP, of course, now already. So if you're connecting your devices with a network if you're connecting the audio and the video via network as well, of course, that makes it very easy to transfer the control protocol over that same network cable. And so it makes it very easy to control a networked AV system. We also like that networked AV, that we get to work with the IT department and not against it. In many cases, we're seeing, especially in large enterprises, that the IT department has taken a much larger control of the specification and installation of audiovisual systems within their enterprise. And of course, networked AV is right in their wheelhouse. It uses the same terminology they're familiar with, uses a lot of the same technology as far as network switches and routers that they're very familiar with. And so instead of trying to always try and fight against the IT department, if you're using AV over IP, you're working with the IT department, and you're using terminologies and the types of protocols that they're very familiar and comfortable with. So let's talk about money. That's always a big impact on a lot of these things. So one of the things that we like about networked AV is, especially as you start looking at a large distribution of AV devices that all need to be connected, it's much less expensive to do that in a networked AV scenario. So a traditional AV, if you wanted to connect a lot of devices together, you might use what's called a matrix switcher. It allows you to switch anything that's connected to an input to anything that's connected to an output. It's very flexible that way. However, a very large traditional AV matrix switcher can be very expensive. So let's look at a couple of examples. In a traditional sense, you might have a 16 by 16 HDMI matrix. So if you think of that in ports, that would be like a 32 port device. A device like that might have a list price somewhere in the $16,000 range, where at the same time, you could buy a 48 port managed gigabit switch, complete full up with power over Ethernet and a lot of the other features that we might like. And that's only $3,500. So you can see the significant savings there just in the core infrastructure that you might need to do a large distribution system. As we look at a larger system, if you think of a 64 by 64 HDMI matrix, that's 128 ports, we'll say. That's about $107,000 list. Where if you wanted to do AV over IP, if you had 3 48 port gigabit network switches, and these are really high-end, true stacking switches, they would list out at about $40,650. You could probably get by with much less money than that, actually, on the AV over IP side, if you didn't want quite as much stacking bandwidth between the various switches. You could get that maybe down into the to the $16,000 range or less. So again, you can see the significant savings that you can be had there by using networked AV, especially for large distributions. One of the things we like about networked AV is that once you've designed the system and you have various components that take audiovisual signals and put them on the network, in most cases, well, in many cases, let's say that, in many cases, that content is already in the correct format that you need to record that over a network. So if you want to record things or you want to stream it over a long distance, you want to make a wide area network stream out of this, the beauty is it's already been encoded in a format that's very easy to record with the system, or it's very easy to stream that out. And so once you've already got it in a network form in a very open protocol is very easy to do that with. We also like the fact that it's a simplified path towards software-only, server-based AV solutions. So this is a very interesting trend where instead of having very customized boxes for your AV hardware, for example, audio digital signal processing, those tended to be very customized boxes that you can only buy from an AV company. There's current trends now to where, hey, let's make that a software solution instead of a pure hardware solution. Let's just run it on any available server, and as long as that server has adequate network bandwidth, we're going to be able to do all of the digital signal processing on any available server. So QSC actually was one of the first companies to release that. They've announced abilities to just have a Dell server, and they're running a piece of software on that Dell server that mimics one of their existing digital signal processors. And so that's a much easier trend. Again, as you think of the IT managers, they want to put everything on a server. This is a way for them to do that. So it really makes that path toward software-based AV solutions much easier if it's already on the network. We like enabling technologies such as Power over Ethernet. We love Power over Ethernet. It makes the install, again, very easy to do, because what happens is the power goes over the network cable. So you don't have to worry about having an electrician come in and add an electrical outlet where you need it to connect to that device. You just make the network connection from the Power over Ethernet enabled switch to the device that's ready to take power, and it gets its network and all its traffic from that network cable, but also its power. So it's already powered and ready to go wherever you want to install it. So we're going to take just a couple minutes and kind of just describe, our view of 3 different types of systems, and then we're going to have a little chart here in a second that kind of compares them. So let's talk briefly about traditional AV systems. Again, in a traditional AV system, you're connecting devices to some type of central AV switch in many cases, or they could be directly connected to each other. You're connecting them with what would be recognized as traditional AV type cables. So that'd be HDMI or DisplayPort on the video side. On the audio side, it would be some type of audio cable, maybe an XLR connector or a 3.5 millimeter like headphone type connector. Those would be like traditional AV type connections that you would have there. And from a control perspective, these devices are directly connected to a control processor. In general, they're going to use RS-232, IR, or contact closure in a traditional sense. Now, I will say that on the control side, they've been network-based for a very long time, and so even traditional control for AV has been kind of outdated for a number of years now. So let's talk about twisted pair AV systems. Again, this would be something like the HC-based T system I talked about earlier. Devices are either directly connected or via a central AV switch. Again, it uses the same type of network cable, this category cable. In this case, it's a special kind of category cable. In many cases, they need a shielded category cable, a little more expensive, a little more difficult to terminate, and you can normally run those up to about 100 meters. Again, with audio and twisted pair, the audio is either embedded with a video signal, or you're probably not going to be using twisted pair because there's really no benefit to using a twisted pair cable for audio only. And for control, again, with twisted pair, your control is either usually embedded with a video signal. So you might have video and audio and control all over the same twisted pair cable that you can then use to make that connection. The other thing you can do with twisted pair cable is we actually just use it as a transfer medium of the cable type, even for RS-232. We might get some RJ45 adapters of various types, and we would use a twisted pair type cable to send just traditional RS-232 connectivity over a network type cable. Since we talk about AV over IP, so again, in this case, the devices can either be connected directly to one another, or they can be connected to a common network switch. So again, these are readily available network switches. In many cases, it can use an unshielded category cable. Traditional gigabit-based network, can use a Cat6 cable. It's unshielded, and it runs gigabit network just fine. Audio, again, you might connect the same way, either directly connected or via network switch. What we like about this is that it's by definition, it's all digital video and it's all digital audio if you're using AV over IP. And it can, again, use some unshielded category cables to connect the devices. And very similar for control, very similar. So let's compare and contrast those a little bit then, and let's see again why we like AV over IP so much. So, as far as can they have any size system? Well, all three of them can be basically produced in any size system. Are they easy to upgrade? Now, I would argue that AV over IP is definitely the easiest to upgrade. Now, twisted pair, it might be easy to upgrade depending upon the scenario, but in many cases, it would be much more difficult to upgrade than an AV over IP system. We talked about the matrix type switching that you would need. Very, very expensive to do a large matrix switch in either a traditional or a twisted pair type solution, where AV over IP, it's relatively inexpensive. What type of cable do they use? Again, we talked about the benefits of category cable. It's ease of use. Traditional is probably not going to use a category cable. Twisted pair, you probably need to use the more expensive and difficult to terminate shielded, or AV over IP is unshielded. How far can you extend it on a copper cable? Again, you can see the benefits of twisted pair or AV over IP there. Can it be powered via the cable? Again, you can power some things with a twisted pair cable, but you can also use power over Ethernet on an AV over IP basis. Can it use your existing network switches or your existing premise wiring? This is where we're really beginning to see the benefits of AV over IP, as well as is it pre-formatted for recording or streaming? Again, AV over IP is right there. And really, how many devices can you connect? Again, at the top, I guess any size system. You can make any size system, although I will say in a traditional sense, we're normally looking at less than 16 devices if you want to keep it in any type of reasonable price point. For twisted pair, you're probably looking at about less than 128 devices. 16 by 16 is a reasonable price point for that, or 64 by 64, I'm sorry. And then for AV over IP, really it's pretty much an unlimited number of devices that you can have connected to that system. So let's spend just a couple of minutes to talk about video over IP. Now, certainly this is the growth trend that we've seen the most in the last few years, is the video over IP. So it's starting to become very common, and we love that, again, it utilizes standard network switches in many cases, and it's very easy to replace traditional AV matrix switches with just a standard network switch. We see video over IP in all areas of the video ecosystem. We see it as inputs and outputs. There's a lot of wall plates now that you can buy that have, for example, an HDMI connection on the front, but it has a network connection on the back side of the wall plate. So it's a direct video input to an IP. We see a lot of cameras, especially fixed or pan-tilt zoom cameras are installed, pan-tilt zoom cameras that certainly are ready to go straight to IP. Now the question becomes, do we see displays or projectors with video over IP direct inputs? Well, not quite yet. We haven't seen a whole rash of the end displays that are ready to go video over IP, but we believe that's coming, and we're going to see that in the next year or so. We like that you can also do the processing all network-based. So for example, in a traditional sense, if you needed to do video wall processing, you would have to have some kind of dedicated video wall processor. You would have traditional inputs and outputs to that video wall processor. You may need special extension between the video wall processor and other devices. What's cool about video over IP is that you can have a video processor that only has network connections to it. So the video streams come in as a network, they're processed as a video wall inside the device, and then they're output back out as a network stream. And so it's all network-based. It's essentially a rack mount network box that you just connect up to your network switches. And it becomes a very easy way to do things like video wall processing or perhaps recording and playback. We're beginning to see playback and recording devices that are network-based. So you don't even have a traditional HDMI or DisplayPort input to this recording device. All it is a network connection, and all your recording is being done on the network. I show a couple examples from Evertz, which has some examples of that type of technology right now. Now, buzzword for video over IP this year was 4K 60 444. I have some slides that we could go over later on if we have some time that kind of unpack for the 4K 60 444, and we'll see if we have time to get there. But needless to say, what that means is 4K means you have a lot of pixels, 60 hertz means that you're refreshing it very fast, and 444 means that you have all of your color information available to you. And not all of the video over IP devices that are 4K ready were in that configuration up to this year. So we saw a lot of new things. Crestron added 4K 60 this year. Christie had a new device. And then I won't read them all, but you can see them there. And those are joining some existing options from SVSI, which is now under the Harman brand name, and then the Clear One View Pro, for example. So let's show a couple of examples of how this all might connect together. So here's an example that Matrox put together that you can take a peek at. Again, you can see a lot of different devices that are all connected to a local area network. At the top, you see some recording devices there. As far as the inputs, you might see a camera connected to a box then that connects to the network, or a computer that connects to a video to IP converter to get that onto the network, a cable TV box. And you might see some cameras. Again, they show a computer or a camera that are directly connected to the LAN. They might output directly to a network. And then on the output side, again, you have various displays or even a video wall that might be able to be used over a network-based solution. Another example we have is from Evertz, and I mentioned them earlier. Now theirs is a little bit different in that theirs is all based on a 10 gig network, not a gigabit network. So this is a little bit different. It's fiber-based in most cases, but it's a little more expensive. But it also provides a lot more capabilities as far as the number of video streams that you can carry over each individual connection. So they have a little in-room switch that you have there, and it can connect via 10 gigabit Ethernet to a 10 gig network switch. And you see again their multi-image display processor that's only connected to the network switch, kind of on the right middle there. Then you have inputs and outputs that might connect also to the network switch. And what's cool is they even thought ahead on the audio side to also keep that in the network. So their little local room switcher, in addition to having the video connections over 10 gig Ethernet, also has a Dante connection for the audio. So the audio is also network based. And so that's a very cool forward thinking way to go with that. And you can go that directly into an audio DSP then with a network. So you think about audio, and we haven't talked about audio much now. We will say that the audio manufacturers have been much further ahead on the network-based transfer than the others. There was CobraNet that's been out for, boy, over 10 years now probably. And it was a little bit of a clunky protocol, but it worked, and it was using network switches to transfer things. So they've been at this for much longer than everyone else. Now the current best practice right now, I guess, or the protocol that most people are using for audio is the Dante protocol. We're going to talk about that more here in a second. But here's a picture by Audinate and what that might look like. Again, you can see some network interfaces there, that audio that runs right into the network. The wireless microphone receivers, so you have wireless mics, but the wireless microphone receivers, they only have network outputs, so you can connect those right to a Dante network. Your digital system processing is all network-based. Even the microphones that you have, maybe the microphones that you have set on your table or the ceiling microphones that you would have, those also, you can buy those now to have just a network output. They're power over Ethernet, they have a network connection, and so literally it never makes an analog audio connection from that microphone. And all the way to the speakers. The speakers themselves may have a Dante input card, maybe self-powered speakers. And so literally you can create a whole audio system where you don't even use a traditional audio cable. It's simply all network-based with Dante. So what are some of the key considerations that you might want to think about as you're considering AV over IP? Well, a few of them you might want to think about are bandwidth, interoperability, and security. So let's talk about bandwidth first. The term bandwidth, you can refer to that as a couple of different things. So you want to understand what it means in context. Bandwidth might mean the total available capacity of a network. And that term is also used to refer to the actual used network capacity. So you might say this device uses this amount of bandwidth, where you might also use the term as far as this network has this bandwidth capacity. So you need to understand the context so that you understand. But what's important here is that you understand the bandwidth of your devices, because you need to make sure that the bandwidth that's used by your devices is less than the available bandwidth provided by the network that you have in place. Now, I will say this is much generally a video concern. Audio and control often require much lower bandwidth. So that's why they were maybe sooner to market, because it was much easier to use because they didn't have as bandwidth to use. That's why audio and control were much quicker to move down the network path. So for now, it's primarily a video concern because video just uses so much more bandwidth than the others. So as we talk about video, we might want to talk about a video bit rate, and this is how we begin to determine what the bandwidth of a video signal is. So a video bit rate has a lot of different components to it. One of the components would be how many pixels are involved. What's the resolution? For example, a common resolution would be full HD, which would be 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels tall. Or you might think 4K UHD, which would be 3840 pixels wide by 2160 pixels tall. So that's the pixel count that we're talking about. Then we talk about the refresh rate. Basically, how many times a second do you get a new frame of video from that video signal? Very common computer video rate has been 60 hertz per second. That's been a very common rate out of a computer. Now, movies and television, they've operated at 24 hertz or 30 hertz for a long time. And in fact, even today, a very common home theater HD TV signal would be 1920 by 1080 at 30 hertz, so at 30 frames per second. You need to ask, what's your color depth? And that basically refers to how many color bits are in each pixel. So each pixel is comprised of 3 different colors, red, green, and blue. And you can have a certain number of data bits that describe the color for each pixel. So, we might talk about 10-bit color. You might talk about 8-bit color. 8-bit color has been kind of the de facto standard for a long time, but we're beginning to see more people look at 10-bit color or 12-bit color because they want a lot deeper color palette to work with. And of course, the more data that you add to each color, the more total bandwidth, or the higher the video bit rate. And then you can talk about color compression. So there's a concept called chroma subsampling, and this is what some people use as part of their video signal to reduce the amount of color information. Now, again, if we have time, there's a fun little thing we might get to here in a minute that talks about this. But what you need to know for now is you'll see some funny terms around that: 444, 422, or 420. And essentially, 444 means that you have all of the color information. So for every pixel, you have a full amount of color information, where for some of the others, 422 or 420, perhaps not every pixel has all of its color information represented in that particular frame. So you might have 2/3 of the total color information, or even half of the total color information involved for 420. So here's how you might calculate a digital video bit rate if you were interested to do so. And we're going to call this a raw digital video bit rate because this is just the video information itself. So very much a raw digital video bit rate. So the formula would be this: the video bit rate equals the horizontal pixels times the vertical pixels times the refresh rate times the color depth times 3, because that's 3 colors, red, green, and blue. And then there might be some ratio that you would do to account for chroma subsampling. So as an example, a very, very common video signal would be full HD at 60 hertz with 8-bit color, 444. So as you do the math, you get full HD, so that's your pixel count, 1920 by 1080. And then 444, that means you have your full color information. So your your ratio factor for chroma subsampling would be 1 in this case. So there you start to do the math. You can see how the math plays out there. What you end up with is just shy of 3 gigabits per second for a full HD 60 8-bit color 444. Again, that's a raw digital video bitrate. Let's talk about IP networks. So IP network speed is also measured in a bit rate, or bits per second. So most office local area networks today operate at a 1 gigabit per second kind of bit rate. Some older networks may only operate at 10 or 100 megabits per second. So again, much lower bandwidth available to you. If you wanted to try and do some video over IP on those networks, you may need to really take a harder look at the devices and what their video bit rates are. Some specialized LANs can operate at either 10 gigabits or 40 gigabits a second or more. You can do 100 gigabits a second. It gets to be very expensive and very specialized hardware to do that at this point. Now, of course, the technology trend marches on. You're going to see 10 and 40 gigabits per second become very common at some point in the near future. But for now, it's still semi-specialized as a special video bitrate or a network bitrate. Some of the AVoverIP solutions are designed around that 10 gigabit network. So there's actually a whole infrastructure, a host of manufacturers out there that are really designing their AVoverIP solutions around this specialized 10 gigabit network. It allows them to, again, as we talk about this, as you see the 10 gigabit network, we talked about how each HD stream takes about 3 gigabits per second. If you do a 10 gigabit network stream, that means you can actually transfer 3 full HD network streams down a 10 gigabit network. So that's one of the reasons why you might see that. And you can do that fully uncompressed. Now, because of the way network traffic is packetized, there is a certain amount of overhead in the network bandwidth. So that's why we talked about what the raw video bitrate was. Well, now to put that over a network, you have to put in a packet. There's some header information, and there's some information in there that goes along with the actual video data and just put into a packet. So for rough calculations, assume there's about 10% of overhead for the network traffic. And that's probably a little bit on the high side in most cases. It might run more in the 6 to 9% range, but it's just helpful for as a rule of thumb to kind of assume 10% is what you're going to take out for overhead traffic. So what that basically means for your typical office LAN, your 1 gigabit per second LAN, your effective payload data rate may only be 900 megabits per second. So you'll need to make sure that you take into account the network overhead if you begin to understand what your overall network bandwidth usage is. So here's a curiosity. So now there are certain manufacturers out there that are beginning to offer products that distribute 4K or UHD at 60 hertz with your full 444 color bandwidth going on a 1 gigabit per second network. If you were to go to run the math, what you'd find is the 4K 60 444 bit rate is somewhere on the order of 12 gigabits per second, and your effective payload data rate on a 1 gigabit network is 0.9 gigabits per second. So what is going on with that? Something doesn't add up there. The basic math just doesn't seem to work. So here's what's going on. Compression is what's going on. So what they're doing is actually they're using an algorithm or various different algorithms to actually compress the video signal into a much smaller bandwidth. So what compression does is it reduces the overall bit rate of the content. Video compression may take into account a number of different things. For example, it may only look at the pixels that change from one frame to the next. So if a pixel is static from one frame to the next, it may not actually send that pixel information down with that next frame. It may go, hey, that pixel didn't change. I'm not going to send that pixel down the video's chain. So it may only send the pixels that change from one frame of video to the next. And actually, even if the pixels are moving, if you have like a stationary background, but some pixels are moving, They can actually even take into account motion vectors. They can do some quick analysis, analyze, hey, where did that pixel go from the last frame and the frame 2 frames back? And it can kind of do some prediction on where that pixel might be in the next frame. And so it might use that to also reduce the amount of bits or data that they send down each frame. You know, if you look at the video that I have up right now, it's a lot of white field there, so a lot of white pixels in a row. Certain compression protocols might take into account, hey, I see a whole bunch of white pixels in a row. I'm not going to send all those white pixels because I know there's a whole bunch of them together. We'll just kind of send a message down that, hey, there's X number of pixels of all the same, instead of actually sending the data for each pixel. Now, a lot of that's actually not done as simplistically as I just described it there. It's actually done with much more complicated math, things called wavelet transforms, and things that I do not claim to understand. This is very complex math. But just be well aware that the compression is there, and it can really begin to reduce that. So there are also some very, very common protocols with regards to compression. So network bandwidth. So ultimately, here's what we need to sum up with regards to network bandwidth. What you really need to do is you need to work with your manufacturer or your integrator to understand the real-world network bandwidth and bit rate. So what is the bit rates that you really need for the devices that you want to connect to the network, and what is truly the available bandwidth on the network as it is. You know, you also need to take into account, are you sharing that network with other traffic? If the network's dedicated to AV over IP, that is not as much of a problem. But if you want to just run it over your general office network for some reason, and there might be some reasons to do that, you need to take into account other network traffic. Maybe you have your telephone traffic on that same network, so your voice over IP traffic. Maybe you have, of course, just general internet browsing information or file transfers internally to a network. You'll need to take into account the other types of network traffic on your network to truly determine what might be available for your AV over IP. And then after you've done all that, you've determined, hey, what kind of traffic are we going to have? Are we going to share? What's the total needs available? Then you can stop and understand, okay, what is the network switch speed required? Can I get by with a gigabit network switch, or do I need to move up to a 10 gigabit switch or more? And then if you're starting to connect network switches together, the links between the network switches can actually be the bottleneck. The switching backplane on a switch itself, if the network all stays within the switch, in and out the same switch, the network backplanes are normally very wide, and so you have a lot of bandwidth there. But if you want to then link a number of different network, another number of different video or audio streams from one network switch to another, the network cable between the two network switches then becomes your bottleneck. So you may need to take into account that. A lot of network switches are planned for that and give you uplink ports that are a much higher bandwidth, or can be a much higher bandwidth than the other ports on the switch. But you also need to think through that and make sure you understand what bottlenecks you might have between various network switches in your infrastructure. So that was bandwidth. Let's talk about interoperability. So are they going to work together? So we talked briefly about protocols. Manufacturers are realizing that one protocol is not necessarily idealized for everything. So they're making a whole different set of protocols to support various needs in the infrastructure. So here's some very common protocols you might see. You might see an H.264 or an H.265 protocol. You might see a Motion JPEG 2000 protocol involved, or there might be some type of proprietary protocol that the particular manufacturer is using, some proprietary compression algorithm that they feel is idealized for some reason to run down that network. So what's interesting, and I show one here, are a couple of different brands. SVSI, again, the Harman brand, the AMX Harman brand, SVSI, they have 3 different lines of AV over IP devices that you can use depending upon what the needs are. So they're N3000 series devices or an H.264 type device. They're N2000 series devices or more of a JPEG 2000 type device. And their N1000 devices are more of a proprietary type protocol. So depending upon the needs of the moment in which protocols you want, you can choose devices accordingly. Now, the challenge is you need to make sure that everything is connecting to the same protocol. So what's the difference between the protocols? Well, of course, some of them are historical. Especially the H.265 or the H.264 protocols, there's a lot of history there. It started actually with like an H.261, then there was an H.263, and then H.264. Now the most recent one is the H.265. So they keep growing in their capabilities, the amount of bandwidth that they can handle, the size of the video that they can handle. So there's some history there. And some of it is, are you more comfortable with a more established protocol versus maybe a newer and less well-established protocol? Are the protocols an open protocol, like the H.264 protocol is a very open protocol, versus a proprietary protocol that a manufacturer might choose to use themselves? So you'll need to understand that. You might choose a protocol based upon how much information is lost during the compression. So we'll talk about lossless versus lossy protocols, or type of or non-lossy protocol. So basically, when you do the compression algorithm, depending upon how they do the compression, certain amounts of data might not be recoverable when you uncompress that video signal. So you can compress it in such a way that when you uncompress it, all of the information comes back, but that might take more bandwidth to compress it that way. Or you might compress the video in such a way that some of the information lost when you did the compression, this does not come back when you uncompress it. So you might have some amount of data loss in the compression and uncompression. So that would be considered a lossy video codec. So it depends on the exact scenario that you're using, whether your tolerance for lossy protocol versus a lossless protocol. So that's something that you might want to consider when you're choosing your protocols. To sum this slide up, though, different protocols are seldom compatible. So you'll need to make some decisions early on as you're deciding, especially on the video side, what protocols you want to use early in the design process, because once you've made that decision, it's very unlikely to be able to have other devices that are compatible with that particular protocol. There's certainly some outstanding questions in the marketplace with regard to, especially video protocols. Is there going to be a standard for video over IP? There's certainly a group of organizations that have created various industry trends, or industry associations. One of them would be the SDVOE organization, and that stands for the Software-Defined Video over Ethernet. So Software-Defined Video over Ethernet is what SDVOE stands for. So are they going to be the growing standard here? Are they going to win the marketplace? AVB, they're kind of on a downward trend, but certainly still there. They got a little bit of a fresh air breath in the last year as Cisco finally came on board with some true AVB compatible switches on the Cisco side. So we'll see if that breathes new life into the AVB protocol. Is a broadcast protocol going to win? TICO is kind of a compression algorithm, and you might see a SMPTE 2022. That would be more of a broadcast video type protocol. Are they going to end up winning this? So it's going to be interesting to see where that all goes. And then you got to think about where is that all going to fit into a bigger picture of Internet of Things, right? So audio and video processing is often PC based. So we'll have to watch and see. We talked about the QSC working through their DSP on a Dell server platform. So lots of things to come, especially as this trend of AV over IP as well as the trend of Internet of Things kind of merge together. It'll be curious to see where that all goes. As far as audio protocols, in the battle of the audio network protocols, Dante was definitely the clear winner. AVB and Cobranet were kind of dying players in the audio protocol network. Now, there is an open standard called AES 67 that Dante and AES 67 are very interoperable. Not guaranteed to be interoperable, but a lot of availability to be interoperable between those two standards. So we're very excited about that. Almost all the major audio manufacturers now are going to be supporting Dante. And one of the cool things about Dante is that there's also a Dante virtual sound card. So basically, you connect a PC up to a network, and you have this virtual sound card, and it basically sends the audio from the PC out directly as Dante over the network connection connected to that PC. So you don't even need to make any other audio connection to that PC. So finally, let's talk about security. Anytime you put something on a network, of course, network security is going to be a serious consideration, something that you're really going to want to think about. For sure, you're going to want to make sure that what you're doing is secure enough so that there's no disruptions to what you're doing. That could either be a malicious disruption, somebody trying to hack you, or it could just be a mistake one of your employees makes that might cause the disruption of your audio or your video signal. So you want to make sure that it's safe from any type of disruptions. The other part of security is the content itself private? Is there something about it that you might not want others to see or hear? Now, that's something that Dante's actually been kind of known for recently, is that they don't have a lot of security protocols as far as the content goes, and they have this very cool little app that you can use that you can run on any PC that basically can sniff and listen to any of the Dante traffic on the network. So a lot of corporate clients of ours have said, really, we don't want Dante stuff on our network because it's not secure, and the Dante audio in my boardroom, somebody can just walk into our building, connect to the network, and they can immediately hear any of the Dante traffic on the network. So that's something that you're going to want to think about. Now, Dante, we're going to talk about Dante Domain Manager here in a minute, and they made some strides that way. But that's something you want to think about, is how secure is the data, and how concerned are you if somebody were to listen in or to see the video stream that you have on your network. So there's a couple of different ways you can get some security. One would be physical security. So there's some, you might just want to restrict physical access. So make sure people don't have access to the network switch. Make sure people don't have access to network ports that are unused. So that's just some basic thoughts there. Just make sure that you don't have access to the network. You might want to create your own isolated network. And this is what we've done for a long time in the AV industry for control networks. We've just created our own separate network. It's not connected to anyone else's network, all of our own traffic on our own little network. And so, you might want to think about creating an isolated network for your AV over IP traffic, depending upon the needs of the moment. And then you might want to think about, bridge networks. So this is kind of a blend where you might have a kind of an isolated network and then your other corporate network, and then there's the single point of bridging between those two networks. It kind of serves as a firewall. It kind of serves as a way to control access between the two networks. You get some of the benefits of having the networks connected together, but also have a kind of a secure point there that you can use to kind of control the security of your AV over IP content. There's some things you can do virtually in that way as well to kind of separate the traffic. So one thing you could do is do a virtual local area network, or a VLAN. This is basically a software configuration of your network switch that basically says these ports on the network switch can talk to each other, and these other ports on the network switch can talk to each other, but between those two groups, no traffic can go from one group to the other. It's all a single network switch. It's all just done with software and programming of the network switch to determine which traffic can go from which port to which port. So it's actually a very convenient way, without having to buy a completely separate network switch. You can kind of create an isolated network within a single network switch. Another thing you might want to think about is encryption. So is the data that's being transferred over the network, is it encrypted or not? So that way, if you have somebody that gets onto your network and is kind of sniffing the network traffic, if they gather that network stream, if it's encrypted, it makes it much harder for them to see the video or hear the audio of that encrypted video stream if they happen to gain access to your network. Finally, there's access control. So this is more of a, when we think about computer network type access control. So this might minimize the user's ability to log in to the devices or to log on to the streams of network traffic on the network. So this is very similar to what you would have in your computers in your corporate environment. You know, everybody has a login, they can log in. They may have access to certain network shared folders. They may have different access or no access at all to other folders or other network resources. So this is the way that you can kind of also access, control some of your AV over IP solutions by basing it upon certain users. So you can create multiple users accounts, and these user accounts have various control authorization over the AV over IP network. They can make switches or not, or they can listen to certain traffic or not, but it's all done based upon the user's login and what credentials and authorization that you provide that particular user. In many cases, you can actually use your existing directory accounts, Active Directory or LDAP, to do that. You might even want to have an audit trail available to you, like who changed what on the AV over IP network and when and why. So that way, if something bad happens, you can go back and kind of see, hey, what happened here and who did what? So an example of that is, again, the Dante Domain Manager. Having listened to some of the concerns, this is a new product out by Dante that takes care of a lot of things that we've been talking about in this whole security section. It gives them access control. It kind of does virtual networking to separate the various networks. It gives people an audit trail of who changed what on the Dante account. So you're going to begin to see this increasingly on the video side as well, as security continues to be a prime concern for anything you put on a network.
That's it?
That's it.
A lot of great information in there, and I know we're kind of right up against time. So we'll just take one quick question here, and then obviously if you have additional questions, please send them in and we can respond to you privately. Again, you know, Mike went through a ton of information, and it, of course, for Mike, it might seem like it's an easy thing for him to understand. So question is being, if you decide to go down this path, go down to AV over IP, how easy of a switch is it to make for your organization?
Well, it's actually not that hard a switch to make, but you really want to plan ahead. It's more about making sure that you're thinking through everything and planning, doing a lot of upfront planning. You know, it really would make sense to be reaching out to someone who does this every day, a systems integrator of some sort, or reach out to various manufacturers and gather some information. There's a lot of great information on the web. So if you're an organization that wants to go down this path, again, I'd encourage you study up, find some other webinars like mine. There's lots of webinars out there right now about AV over IP. Make sure you understand what you're up to. And then do a lot of upfront planning, because that makes all the difference in whether you're going to be successful or not. Once you're planned up well, it's actually not that difficult to transition in many cases.
Right. And does it take very long? Like you said, once you're planned and there, I mean, kind of what's the timing that you're looking at?
It's really the similar type timing that you would to do any other type of AV upgrade. So if you're going to do an AV upgrade in a traditional sense, where you're upgrading your network switch or your matrix switcher in a traditional AV system, maybe upgrading some cables in your traditional AV system, it's about the same length of time that you would have to do an upgrade to an AV over IP type solution.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mike. And thank you all for logging in and listening. This was recorded, and I will send out a recording within the next 24 hours, so you'll have that as well to refer back to. Thanks so much for your time.